Good morning. Good to see you all here. Good to see you back. Hopefully you've rested. Hopefully you didn't party too hard last night and eat too many finger foods. We've got a fun talk here this morning. Tips and tricks. Get the most out of GitHub Copilot. But before we get into that, I meant to do this yesterday, but we did not have enough time. I mentioned to you all yesterday in my intros, we'll come past this, that I've been here-ish before. This picture, again, is DevReach 2013, and apparently in this picture I'm saying you must be this tall to attend, which you all passed that bar. But since this is a moment of significance, we're bringing DevReach back here in Bulgaria, you all should be part of this. So let's take a selfie, let's warm up here this morning, be part of the new DevReach. Can I get everyone? My arm's long enough? There we go. Say hi to everyone, we'll post this later. You're part of the new DevReach tradition. All right, now your arms are moving, your blood's flowing, we're waking up. That's a good start. If I did not see you yesterday, or if you're just here for the first time today, by way of introduction, my name is Todd Anglin. I'm currently at Microsoft as part of the Cloud Advocacy Team, which is a DevRel team at Microsoft working across the entirety of Microsoft Cloud and AI. So if there's anything Microsoft related that you want to talk about, talk to me and I'll send you to the experts. I am merely a router here. If you need to find me or ask questions after today's session, you can find me on pretty much all of the socials that someone over 40 would be on at Todd Anglin, so pretty much Twitter and Threads. So I don't think Threads is available here yet, right? No? Meta does not bring Threads to Europe. No even head shakes. We're not even sure what Threads is. Like two head shakes. All right. I also went back and found, I mentioned to you all yesterday, let's see how many people remember, the first DevReach that I spoke at. Do you remember what year that was? Look at that, some listeners. You all get gold stars. I have no other prizes for you today. And I actually found, I was trying to figure out what year I attended, and I found out I wrote a blog post after I attended, apparently, however many, 15 years ago. I even forgot I wrote this. So my own blog post came up in my own search, so there you go. And what I found funny about this is apparently there were DVDs produced of the event. That's how far back that was. We sent you the content on a disc, no more. But today we're here to talk about GitHub Copilot, your AI pair programmer. And I'm curious as we get started, we'll keep our blood moving, our arms moving. How many people in here have already done some work with GitHub Copilot? All right, look around. That's probably about half the room. Remember these hands? These people have probably already learned things that I may not even talk about that they can tell you. Because a lot of what GitHub Copilot does for you is about discovering things that are valid to your workflows. So as you use it, you're going to find new and interesting ways for it to be more useful to you. So talk to people that are using it. Talk to them about what they've found useful. Because at the end of the day, as the name says, it's really right there on the screen, this is a pair programmer. This is almost like having someone sitting there right next to you that you can ask questions of, you can bounce ideas off of, you can prompt for some help and they can give you an answer. The more you work with it, the more you realize that this is kind of an accelerant to what's already in your head. And what we aim to do today in this session is both introduce you to kind of how this works, but also give you some tips for how you can get the most out of this virtual pair programmer sitting next to you in your IDE. So 3 things we'll cover today. How does it work? We'll start with that. That'll be kind of brief and basic, just so you know what's behind the magic. So it's a little less magical and it's a little more of a tool for you. What can it do? So you can think of all the range of ways you can apply this to your work. And of course, we'll wrap up with how do you get it to make sure you can add it to your environment. Underneath GitHub Copilot is something we talked about yesterday, large language models. And yesterday we went into this in depth, today we will not. But if you've ever used a search engine in the last 10 years and experienced something like this, you, without knowing it, have in many ways been interacting with these capabilities of large language models. And as we went through yesterday in a little more depth, it's that ability to understand large sets of data and do a really good job of predicting what comes next based on a prompt or a sequence that came before it. So apparently, if you type in "why don't Z" into Bing, the first and best completion to that is "why don't zebras get ulcers?" I don't know why that's the most popular search for that, but apparently it is. Point is, that is large language models in action. I further thought, well, maybe we could clarify this more with an illustration. So I asked Bing Chat to create an image that illustrates how LLMs work for me. And it gave me this image. I think it nailed the task. Apparently, you need a human brain, a car, some computers, and you have large language models working. So there you go. I didn't need to talk at all yesterday. I could have just put this image up and been done. Fortunately, I have a simpler explanation for GitHub Copilot today, and it really is just this, that the way this works in the context of particularly GitHub Copilot, our coding tool, is you get a lot of code, a lot of examples of how code has been written before, our training data, and you build a model on that. And so that's what GitHub Copilot has. As you build the model identifies the connections, the patterns, the predictability of what comes next based on all of that pre-existing code. And then from that, it does a really good job of predicting completions to your code or to your comments. And so fundamentally, this is what's happening under the covers of GitHub Copilot. And as we talked about yesterday in our talk, remember, these are not magical tools. These are tools, and they have a predictable way of functioning, and that is very much based on your prompt and based on that probability distribution of potential completions. But there are limitations, and these limitations are important for us to understand, especially as we begin using this as a tool to write code. Because if we understand the limitations of our tools, we can anticipate them and also work around them to avoid some of the pitfalls that are potential when we start using these AI tools in our workflow. So first of all, where do these limits exist? The training data impacts the suggestions. That makes sense. What did we say yesterday? We said models are trained to fixed points in time with the data that they have, and they do not learn and they do not remember. So the training data behind GitHub Copilot is very similar. It is based on a fixed point in time, and as you might imagine, it's going to be a lot better for code that has lots of examples to pull into that training data set. So for example, if you work with JavaScript or Java, .NET, Python, all these languages for which there's a lot of open source code out there for GitHub to train on, you're going to get really good suggestions. If you're working with COBOL or other languages which perhaps don't have as many examples out there, new and emerging languages, you may not get the best suggestions today. So keep that in mind, because that may influence the kind of experience you have depending on the work you're doing. Fortunately, a lot of us are working on these kind of core languages that it is very good at completing, and we'll see that today. GitHub Copilot is not a compiler. There was something else we talked about large language models not being able to do yesterday, and that was they cannot perform actions. And that is also true for GitHub Copilot. It cannot compile your code. It does not know when it gives you back a code completion if that code is correct or if that code runs. That's not what it does. It just does a really good job of predicting, based on code it's seen before, what code it thinks should come next. So it's up to you, the pilot in this arrangement, pilot and copilot, to understand whether that code is correct, to use the tools of your IDE to see errors and correct them. The GitHub Copilot is not going to compile and check that for you. So again, you are the pilot. Make sure that you are taking that responsibility to work with what Copilot suggests. And finally, the AI, GitHub Copilot can't read your mind. That's a good thing, I think. We don't want that. But what does that mean for us? That means in order to get good suggestions out of GitHub Copilot, we must provide good context. We can't staple our head to the page, as my math teacher used to say. We have to get what's up here somewhere out there on the page so GitHub Copilot knows what we're trying to do. So the better we can do that, the more context we can provide, the better suggestions we're going to get. Now today, as we work with GitHub Copilot, we're going to be working inside of a couple of IDEs, primarily VS Code. We'll also be doing a lot of our work today, if the internet holds up, in VS Code inside of code spaces, which GitHub Code Spaces is basically a VS Code in the browser with a runtime to build and run our code. So very much kind of a flavor of VS Code. We'll also do some work in Visual Studio 2022 and Windows, but there are other integrations. If you're not a VS or VS Code user here, there are integrations for JetBrains IDEs, NeoVim, other plugins being made. So GitHub Copilot will generally work with your IDE, and that's a good thing. It allows you to build on the tools that are already there, the syntax helpers that are already there, and layer in the Copilot goodness. We'll take a look at this as we work with our tools, and it's a little small up here, but the other thing that affords us is new kinds of UI patterns for how we interact with Copilot as we write code. Inline chat as an example of something that our editors can provide to make the whole GitHub Copilot experience that much more powerful. So this, just recap, I think you all understand this at this point. How is this working? What's happening when we're writing code? We're going to write code inside of our editor. It's going to send that code off as context to GitHub Copilot, which is then going to process it through a model, in this case now a GPT flavor model on the back end, and from that send back a suggestion that will then land directly inside of our editor that we, the pilots of this, can choose to accept, reject, or, and this will come up frequently today, to iterate, to say, hey, that's close, but not quite. Let's try again. And we'll go through this flow until we find the code that perhaps best meets the scenario we're after. The critical thing to being successful here, and I think this is one of our last slides, and we'll move over into demo for most of the rest of our time, is that context. So before we jump into our demos and start doing some of this, let me highlight for you 6 ways that are important for you to keep in mind to make sure you're giving the best context to GitHub Copilot. The first, and maybe it's one of the least obvious, is the actual open files in your editor next to the file you're working on. GitHub Copilot will attempt to take context from about 2 to 3 open files next to your other file you're working on and use that as context to inform the prompt, or rather to inform the completion that comes back to you. So today, GitHub Copilot does not have full visibility of all of the code in your project. If the file is closed, it does not see the context in that file. It sees the file names, it can see the structure, so it has some idea of the kind of code you're working with based on file extensions and file names, but it does not have access to the content. So if you want to have some of your existing code as reference for GitHub Copilot, maybe to see your coding practices, to see an example of something else you've done, having those files open gives Copilot that context. A top-level comment is also a valuable way to guide GitHub Copilot. This is like giving Copilot a goal, helping it understand what you're trying to do in this file. So a top-line comment like, a console app that sorts planets by name and displays output on a terminal at the top of a file, now all of the completions that follow know that that's what you're trying to do. And so it can actually guide GitHub Copilot to giving you better completions as you work through the rest of that file. Includes and references obviously are going to have value to GitHub Copilot. It's going to understand the libraries that you're working with. Meaningful names matter. So if you've been writing code in your project using let's just say less than great coding standards, that's going to show up when you start working with GitHub Copilot. It can infer a lot of intent and a lot of meaning out of things like your variable or function names. For instance, if we had a variable called var list of planets, just by that name alone, GitHub Copilot can infer we're working with a list type. We're dealing with some kind of object that might be named planets, and it can start to look for other references in our code that may be relevant to that, or can generate completions that may be more correct to that variable name. So as you're writing your code, good coding practices matter and are valuable, even more valuable when you're working with GitHub Copilot. And of course, if you're working with things like foo list, I'm sure that was the other guy's problem before you inherited the code, so now's your chance to improve the code base. Specific comments are also very valuable. Of course, we're all great developers. You're here, which means you're a great developer, so I know you comment all of your code for the next person who has to work on it. But if you don't, or if you need an extra reason, comments now are basically like telling GitHub Copilot what you want to get done in very specific sections, and it helps you get very targeted completions. So we'll do a lot of this today so you can see how this works in action, but targeted specific comments are a great way to not only get good GitHub Copilot completions, but to actually create a better, more maintainable code base. And lastly, sample code. This falls into another concept we identified yesterday, the notion of few-shot completions, where we are basically helping a large language model give us a better answer by showing it some examples first of what we want the answer to be. sample code or existing code in your project serves that function. It's effectively training or grounding the model and the kind of answers we want, and specifically to the kind of code you're looking for. So keep all of this in mind. Keep these different contexts in mind, because they're going to come into play as we work through our demos, and we'll see how they impact the code that we get. Last slide here. What is GitHub Copilot good for? Well, the first is probably the most obvious, the one we drift to without even thinking about it. It's great at helping us write basic code faster. I mean, that's kind of what we'd assume. It's here to accelerate the job of writing code. But what you may not know is it's good for a lot of other things in our process as developers. It can help us remember stuff we forgot. In fact, I find that GitHub Copilot's even better for an experienced developer than a brand new developer, because you need to know and be able to recognize that doesn't look right and go back and correct it, or say, yep, that's the thing. I remember that. I just forgot it, or I didn't want to go Google search, find this on Stack Overflow, copy paste, bring it over. It's perfect for those little API endpoints or those CSS class names or whatever it may be that you kind of know, but you don't really remember 100%. GitHub Copilot can do that for you now. Also makes it great at extending and refactoring your existing code. It can work on top of code and change code very easily, so you don't have to figure out complicated regex to go find and replace. It can do all of that. Really useful for explaining unfamiliar code. Let's say you inherited a code base, or you joined a project, and the project's got a lot of code that you need to go understand. GitHub Copilot can explain code to you. And in fact, it can also help you document that code if the last guy forgot to document it. So it can be helpful for those tasks. That's very related to the next bullet. It can help you understand error messages. It can even help you fix errors in your project. And beyond that, it can add tests to your project for you. I think one of the talks yesterday talked a bit about how we all would perhaps add more tests if we had more time, but we're not lazy developers, we're rushed developers. Well, GitHub Copilot can actually help us have a more complete test coverage by adding tests for us. And many other things. In fact, at the end of today's talk, we'll talk about other capabilities GitHub Copilot is going to help us with, like pull requests and things that are coming in the future. But even today, there's a lot that it can help us do here beyond the basics of writing code. Good? Makes sense? All right, see some head nods. This side of the room is nodding. This side of the room, still early, I know. It's late night. Let's get into it, and let's have some fun. So as I said at the outset here, we are going to be trying to do this inside of GitHub code spaces, which means that we're doing a little bit of a finger cross here that our internet's good enough for what we want to do. We're also working with Copilot, and Copilot, like all large language models, is not deterministic, which means that I have no idea actually what's going to happen here. GitHub Copilot can provide a different answer every time I ask the same question. So we're going to be doing very live demos, which means we'll find out together exactly what happens. But that's OK, because this is a great example of how we learn from GitHub Copilot in real time and learn how to adapt to the answers it gives us. So while that is finalizing, make sure my others are ready for us. Good. Great. We'll start here. All right, so we have here, can you all see that in the row there? Good, great. We have a simple script file. Let's just start with something basic, and I'm going to give you about 5 tips as we go through this. And our first tip is that Copilot can give us better answers when we provide single, specific, short comments. Single, specific, and short. So let's say we want a function that can remove HTML from a string. So I can come in here and I can add a comment, create a function that sanitizes HTML. It's pretty short. Let's see if I hit enter what we get from that. All right, so right now we can see that there's some text there, that gray text. That's what we in GitHub Copilot call ghost text. That's its suggestion for what should come next here. And if I like that suggestion, I can just hit tab to accept it. And now you can see it's continuing to complete, and now it gives me even more suggestion for what can complete this. And if I like it, I can hit tab and take that suggestion as well. And here we go. We have an answer. We have a completion to create a function that sanitizes HTML. Is this correct? Let's test our developers in the room. No? No? Someone want to search it and find out? So here's another tip for you with GitHub Copilot and in everything here is you should trust but verify. Trust that it's probably giving you the right thing, but don't trust it blindly. Either use your knowledge as a developer to know that that's not right, or go verify it, either through traditional means like searching, like, is this actually right? Or we can actually have GitHub Copilot explain this to me. I can right-click this, and I can actually right-click here and see there's a Copilot option inside of my VS Code menu, where you can see a few things we'll be doing today. One of the options is to explain this. So I can click Explain This. And now I get what's called the GitHub Copilot chat sidebar, which I have docked in my VS Code secondary sidebar. If you're not familiar, VS Code can have two sidebars, one on the left and one on the right. It's kind of useful if you dock the chat on the right side for easier positioning of your boxes. And if we look at what the explanation is here, explain this, it creates an element, we add the string, we then put that into this, that, blah, blah, blah. I'll tell you this is correct. It's unusual, it's kind of clever, but it actually is correct. The one thing, though, that this requires to work is obviously access to the document object, which only exists if we are running in a web context. So this is correct if my JavaScript's only going to ever run in a web context. Let's say, though, that we know our code might run in other places. We might be running it in a node environment or someplace that doesn't have the document object. So maybe we want a slightly different approach to this. Great. Third tip is, and I mentioned it already before, to iterate. Iterate, iterate, iterate. Don't take the first thing you get back from GitHub Copilot if you think there could be a better way to do it. So single, short, specific, trust but verify, iterate. So let's come back here and let's say, you know what, this is a very short and specific comment, but I think we could probably make it even more specific to get more of the answer that we want. So I could say, create a function that sanitizes is kind of an ambiguous word. What does sanitize mean? So let's say that removes all HTML from a string. Now we have function strip HTML, and it's giving us the same completion. So again, it's different prompt, very similar completion. So we haven't quite tackled the task that we want here. Let's see if we can correct that by coming up here and adding something else. Without using the document object. No, it gave us the same completion, and we are well in the territory of I've never seen GitHub Copilot give me these answers before, so we're going to keep trying this. We're going to live iterate together. I'm like, no, GitHub Copilot, that's not what I want at all. So let's just go ahead and prompt it more directly. Create a function that removes all HTML from a string using regex. There. Now I've got something that I know, or I'm pretty sure, removes all HTML tags from a string and will work anywhere that my application runs, because this is now just regex. There's no dependency on a document object. Again, I am the pilot. Both code technically works, but I know how to steer my code towards what it needs to do, and now we have something with some regex. Now, you all are developers. I know you all read regex fluently, and so you automatically know that that is correct. I don't read regex fluently, so again, the explain option is a great thing for us here. You saw me before right-click on code and say, come here, explain this. We can also use something inside of VS Code called the inline chat. And by hitting Command-I get this little pop-up here right in the context of where my code is. And I can do some more with this later, but for now, I'm just going to say /explain, a slash command. And now it pops again over into our chat, and now it's going to give me a full explanation of how that regex works, what it's doing, and then make me more comfortable that I have the right regex pattern from GitHub Copilot. Trust, but verify. Make sense? All right. One last iteration on this, and we'll move on to the next demo. What's an even shorter and more efficient way I could have prompted GitHub Copilot to do what we're doing right now? Any ideas? What did I hear? Naming the function right. That's exactly it. So I said before that what you name variables and objects matter. So what if we got rid of all of this and we just said function remove HTML from string, and look at that. Now, I just type in the function name, and based on the function name alone, it intuits what I'm trying to do and provides me the same completion as when we wrote that full comment. So you can similarly guide Copilot to giving you these useful completions just by having descriptive, useful names on top of your, or in your code. All right, so let's take this further. We're going to go into some other demos, but I think we can keep going deeper on this one. I talked to you about explain. What if we want to document this for the next person? You saw we had another slash command inside of Copilot. I can come in here and select this code, hit Command I again, go to my slash commands, slash, and we see we have another option in here, document. So I can hit that. This is going to help me automatically add documentation to my methods, to my projects. So now that one task that we all are like, I'll get to it tomorrow. I need to write more code today. No excuse now. If I like this, I can hit accept. And now I have a documented method here. Removes HTML tags from a given string. My parameters and my return types are documented. All I had to do is type /doc, and I got an improvement to my code base. So another thing that GitHub Copilot can help you do. Let's go further. What's the other thing that I would love to skip past right now and not do live on a stage in front of you? Add tests. But let's see if our code actually works by adding some tests. Now, this sample project we're in here right now has no tests. Of course it doesn't. It's a demo project. I don't test my demo projects. So what's going to happen when I try to add tests to this file? We have no idea, do we? It's a mystery. Let's find out what happens. So I'm going to come in here and go back to my inline chat. You're going to see this motion a lot. The inline chat is going to become probably your preferred way of interacting with GitHub Copilot outside of ghost text. So I'll say /tests without any other context. I could prompt it further, but I'm just going to give it the default command here. It's going to think about this for a moment, grab some responses, and here we go. Now we have something that's saying, it looks like some tests for us. It's describing our tests and our different output conditions, and it's putting it inside of a new file called script.test.js. So it's automatically recognizing that there should be a new file for our tests, all from my /test command. Well, let's do this. Let's see what happens. So I'm going to go ahead and say accept this. You can see now it's created the new file for me over here, script.test.js. And here it is next to my original file. Go ahead and close this. This is a new project to me. It's just added tests. I don't have tests. What do I do now? What's my next move? Well, I have a Copilot next to me. I have a friend on stage with me. You can't see them. They're buried inside my computer. I can ask them, what do I do next? And this is where GitHub Copilot Chat can be very useful. This chat bar can help you answer any questions related to coding. It won't tell you what the meaning of life is. It won't tell you a joke, but it will answer questions about coding. So I can ask GitHub Copilot Chat here, how do I run this test? And it's going to go think about this. To run this test, you need a testing framework installed. It's suggesting that I have the Jest testing framework be used. Assuming it's already installed, you can then run npm test, blah, 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 blah. So let's say I don't have installed. How do I have it? I don't think I do. How do I add the Jest testing framework? To add the framework, you follow these steps. Okay, that seems simple enough. So let's open up our terminal. We will take the commands that it gives us, and we will find our terminal here. So the first thing it suggests we should do is npm install -- save dev jest. All right. Again, internet, play nice. We'll get that added. It also gives us the yarn option, so it's already even better than I am. It's suggesting a locked package manager like yarn. We're just going to use npm this morning, but it's giving you some options there. You're the pilot, you pick. It's suggesting that I should have a jest.config.js file looking for my tests. So here we see some little hover options pop up. You see this little UI here with the page, the little split box and dots. If I click on this, I can actually say insert this into a new file without doing any kind of copy paste. So I'll just click this one button, and it suggested that this should be in a new file called jest.config.js. Jest.config.js. All right, sure, why not? It's kind of suggesting I should have my tests in a tests folder. It's not how my project is configured, so we're gonna just go ahead and back that out and hope that we didn't make it too broken. We'll find out. We need a test, we need and then, okay, great. I think that's probably close enough. Let's see what happens if we run our tests. So it says, do this, jest.script.test.js. You notice that it already knows what the name of that test file is that we created, or that it helped us create, the script.test.js. It has that context because it can see that file in my project. So that's a explanation specific to the code I'm working on right now. And we'll hit this and see what happens. Oh, it's not found. So now what? Now it led me down a dark alley and I'm stuck. What do I do next? Well, it's supposedly still my Copilot. I can go ask it for some more help. So I can right-click here in the terminal. So in my terminal output inside of VS Code, just like we were doing for our code before. In fact, let me get the whole message here. Right-click, Copilot explain this. We can have Copilot explain errors to us as well, and it will give us guidance on how to get out of those errors. So it says that this command is being executed in the terminal, but it's not working. But it's not working. I'm sorry to hear that it's not working. Can you please provide more information? So you can see, and I'm not going to go through all of this, you can keep going through a conversation to talk about the problems you're having, get guidance, it'll give you answers to keep you moving, and I find it just makes you get stuck for a shorter period of time. If I were working on a project before GitHub Copilot and I got derailed like this, I've probably left my editor, now I'm in a browser, I'm searching, I'm Stack Overflowing, I'm looking through a blog post, finding the thing I need, and I'm well outside of the flow of writing my code in my editor. By working this problem through Copilot in my editor, I stay closer to the flow of what I'm doing, find my answer faster, and then keep moving through my project. We'll come back to this later, but let's move on to another demo for the sake of time here. And the next demo I'm going to pull up is a simple HTML page. Let's get some of this out of our way here. Bury this. And if you've written HTML, then this should not look hard. This is my best HTML to date. I've got an HTML tag. I've got a header. I've got a footer. I've got a main area. It's impressive, right? It's not impressive. Don't nod for that. That's not impressive. But we're going to do something with this to make this look a little more interesting. Let's preview it in our internal browser first. Little tip here, if you're working inside of code spaces and you get this problem where my internal preview is not working, code spaces will expose a port for us to be able to browse our live preview pages, but we do have to access that first in the real browser sometimes to get the Copilot browser working. So once I've accessed that once, I can come back in here, and now I get the live preview of my code here in this right tab. I'm still going to have a problem with real-time updates. If I come change header, my header, and I take a couple characters off, you can see that the page on the right did not update. When I'm using the live preview inside of VS Code, this should be a real-time update that's happening on the right side. That is also a code spaces quirk, and I can fix that by just coming back down here to my ports that code spaces has exposed. I see my ports that it's auto-forwarding, and just accessing those ports inside of the browser. So I click it again, I see upgrade required. Come back over here to code spaces, kill my live preview. We'll look at it one more time. Now when I make a change, let's say my head to my header, we can see that it updates in real time on the right. So that's just kind of a bonus tip for you if you're working with code spaces and you're not seeing your live previews. Make sure your ports have been allowed and that they've been cleared so that you get those real-time updates if you're doing this kind of work inside of code spaces. All right, so we have a blank page that is connected to a CSS file. That CSS file is here, and that CSS file is blank. One of the things we talked about for giving context to Copilot is giving it a goal. Let it know what you're trying to do. So let's do that for our CSS file. Let's see if Copilot knows CSS, because nobody knows CSS. Create a style sheet with a header and footer that are on the top and bottom of the page. Oh, it's starting to help me complete this. Respectively, the header and footer should be 100% wide. Oh, look at that. It's trying to help me. It's even predicting what I may want to do here. Let's maybe give myself a little more room. Sure, I'll take that. And the header should, this is an interesting game of telephone. What does it think the header should do? The header should, have a background color. Yeah, I like that. Okay. And the footer, any ideas? Okay, sure. We'll take that. And let's see, all right, now we're getting a little too specific. Let me do the whole style sheet up here. I'll say the main area should be scrollable. All right, that's a pretty specific comment. I've given it a description and a goal of what I want my style sheet to be. Let's see if it can create my styles for me for this page. So I'm going to come outside of this, come down here, hit enter, wait for some ghost text. All right, well, a path reference could be useful. I don't think it's really what I need here, but let's see what happens if I take that and go to my next comment. Well, that's definitely not right. Now we're writing HTML in my style sheet. So again, you are the pilot, and this is where your experience, knowing kind of the right direction, is going to help you get more out of Copilot. I can already tell Copilot's going down the wrong path. So one of the things that you may have to do occasionally with Copilot is nudge it. Nudge it in the right direction, and with a little nudge, it can give you a more complete and correct completion. So I know the way I probably want to start my style sheet is by defining a style for the overall HTML and body tag. So I'm just going to type HTML, comma, and let's see if that warms up Copilot a bit. That's better. Now we have a style for body and for something that's going to apply to my whole page. I'll tab, accept that. Let's keep going, see if Copilot's on a roll now. All right, style for my body. Hey, flex layout, that's something I can't do. Header, all right, that's conforming to our comment, background and height. Let's keep going. There's our main area, keep going. There's our footer. And that's pretty much all we gave it a prompt for. So we're off to a good start. We gave it a comment. It has a header and a footer that are stuck to the top and the bottom of the page, regardless of how much content is there. They're a fixed height, and they're 100% width. So we see it's doing what we asked, and it's rapidly building our style sheet for us. Now, the one thing we can't confirm here is whether or not that main middle area is scrollable, because we have no content there. So we need some content. Let's go add some lorem ipsum there to see if this is in fact scrollable. So let's come back over here to our main area. And based on what we've done so far, we might assume that this would be a perfect place to add an HTML comment to get some Copilot help in our HTML for lorem ipsum. So let's just say in an HTML comment, generate 100 lines of lorem ipsum. All right, hit enter. Well, we got a suggestion, but Copilot's suggesting some PHP. Well, I have one problem, and if I add the PHP, then I'll have two problems. So I don't think that's correct, but it also highlights the kind of use case that is not great for Copilot. And when I say Copilot, that's shorthand for GitHub Copilot here, because I know Microsoft has many Copilots. We talked yesterday about how large language models work, and we talked about this notion of a token size and a token limit. That applies to GitHub Copilot as well. There is a token limit, and everything that we have sent it as context and everything that it has sent back to us is part of that token limit. And so when we go ask GitHub Copilot to generate 100 lines of lorem ipsum, that's going to consume a lot of tokens, which first of all means it's not a very efficient way to use GitHub Copilot. but it also means that it's not the kind of thing GitHub Copilot is optimized to do. So keep in mind the kind of thing you're trying to do and whether it's the right kind of application for Copilot. Generating lots of a thing, not a GitHub Copilot use case. But fortunately, we're in our editor, and our editor is pretty good at this. So I can come in here and I can say, instead of this, just lorem, which is a shorthand Emmet abbreviation for lorem ipsum. Oh, but let's do this first. Let me type lorem ips. Yeah. When I start typing lorem, we do get the Copilot completion ghost text for what it thinks is lorem ipsum. So we can see some lorem ipsum ghost text coming up here. So let me actually just take this. And now you can see if you wanted to add lorem ipsum with GitHub Copilot, you could do it line by line. So I could say tab, enter, tab, well, let me get the prompt, enter, let it prompt me, enter. So this is the approach you would end up with lorem ipsum. But what is the other thing you notice about this text? If you've been doing web development for long or any kind of development, does that look like the lorem ipsum you're used to seeing? No. And again, GitHub Copilot, large language models are not fact databases. It's not looking up lorem ipsum and giving it to you. It's just kind of weirdly guessing lorem ipsum, and it looks weird. It's not correct for however correct lorem ipsum ever needs to be. So you could do this with Copilot, but again, not efficient and probably not the result you're expecting. So let's do this in a slightly more efficient way using VS Code. We will instead just come in here and say lorem, and we can just say times 100. And VS Code will automatically expand that out to be 100 instances of that expanded shortcut, and now we have 100 lines of actual lorem ipsum. So now we are much closer to what we are after. And if we come over here then to our page, we can see, well, that is also not quite right, because now our footer's then pushed to the bottom, and that scrollable middle area is consuming the whole page. So we need to do some refactoring. So let's come back over here and attempt to improve the code that Copilot has already given us. Now, if I knew where the code was wrong, I could go straight to that spot and start doing some prompts or some comments to fixing the code. If I don't know where to start, I can use GitHub Copilot Chat. We've seen chat inline. We've seen chat in the sidebar. We also can do chat up here in our Omni bar. Let me see if I can grab this Copilot Quick Chat. Open a bit of it. Quick. I don't see quick chat, so we're just going to do this with regular chat. It's there somewhere. How do I make the main content area scrollable and the footer always shown on the bottom of the page? I'm correcting my typos just because that's my issue. GitHub Copilot can easily understand what you mean if you have typos. So if you have typos, don't worry about it. Yesterday, one of the talks shared how large language models with tokens can understand what you mean even when you make those mistakes. But let's see if we get an answer here. So it's saying to make the main content area scrollable and the footer always from the bottom of the page, you should do this. You should have main flex 1 overflow auto. Well, we have that. And your footer should have this. Okay, so let's maybe take this. So I can just copy this snippet out. That works for this case. Replace that. Save that. Let's see if we're getting closer to what we're after. Let's collapse this. Did that work for us? There we go. We had to refresh it, but now our footer is there. So it's getting us closer. We are now iterated to a closer state to what we are after. We now can see that this scrolls, but now our header scrolls off the page. So we're closer. So now, let's say I know the problem now is my header. So I can come up back here to my inline Copilot chat and say, just here, make the header always visible on the page. And so now, when I select my code inline and give it this prompt, we get this diff view. And whether you're using VS Code or Visual Studio, whenever you do this inline, it's going to show you the proposed change, and you can choose to accept it or discard it. And so it's saying, hey, we suggest that you replace what you've got there, rather you add what you've got there, this code, and if I like it, I can click accept. And now we can see, all right, now my content area is scrolling in between my header and footer. So I'm iterating on my code, iterate, iterate, iterate to get to my result that I want. Still not perfect, still some refinement we could do here, but you get the idea of the workflow of using chat, using inline chat, and comments. Well, we haven't really used comments much. We could go a bit further. And one of the things I said that GitHub Copilot can do well for you is it can help you remember stuff you forgot. How many people know dead cold how to do linear gradients in CSS? Nobody. How many people here are web developers? All right, this half of the room and about a third of this room. So we're all web developers by profession, but we don't really remember how to do linear gradients perfectly. So let's have that done for us. Let me add a comment inside of my style here and say linear, a rainbow, linear gradient background. Let's see what happens. In fact, let's get rid of this background so we don't need it. Let's see if GitHub Copilot can think through this. You notice I didn't even spell it right. I left off the D in background. It doesn't care. It knows what I'm doing. It's giving me some code suggestion here. Let's go ahead and take that and see if that works. And there we go. A complex linear gradient background. We're really getting to that GeoCities 1990 website we're after here. And I'm sure we can reach it if we just try hard enough. How about CSS transitions, animations? Know it cold? Come write it for me right now. Help me out. My new Copilot. No. You stay seated. My Copilot will do this work for me. Let's say we want expand height by 50 pixels on hover using transitions. Transition height. Okay, that's the thing we want to affect. We'll give you more than this. Add box shadow. Well, now we're off into a wrong deep end. So this is, again, where you decide the right place and the right iteration. This may have been better as an inline chat as opposed to a specific comment to get ghost text. So in fact, if I take this content here, say, you know what, maybe this is a little too much for just getting a ghost text completion. I want a more complete chunk of code. We'll come in here and we'll use the inline chat, put that same statement in here, and we'll see that we'll get a slightly different kind of answer. We're going to get an answer that looks at a wider bit of context than where our cursor is in the file. And it should show me now, yes, here's what you want. You want to have transition, ease out, and you want to have a new style for the state of hover that changes the height. So I'm going to go ahead and accept this. And now, when I hover over, I'm getting my CSS transition. Impressive, yes? That is more impressive than I showed you before. That's the best we're going to have today, folks. So if you're not impressed by that, we only have 10 more minutes to suffer through this then. Let's move on. Let's say you are now working on a project that is more than a simple demo. You have joined a bigger project that has existing code, as is more likely. And so in those cases, you have code practices, code standards, file naming conventions that you would probably prefer continue to extend into any new code you add in your project. And so what we want to do here is we have a very simple canonical to-do app. We have a to-do service written in TypeScript. And what we want to do, management has come, they've said, you know what, this app is great at handling to-dos. Now it needs to handle tasks. And we're like, damn it, this is a to-do app, not a tasks app, but management spoke. How are we going to do this? Well, we have a to-do service. Maybe we can just go ahead and add a task service to this application. That makes sense. And we can see in our current to-do service that we're using Cosmos DB as our backing store. And you can see, and we'll get to this in a moment, that we have a pretty wonky coding standard that our intern added to the code base where every other character is capitalized. We may want to change that later, but for now, that is what our code base has. Let's try this in two different ways to see what happens when we add different context to GitHub Copilot. I'm going to close that file. That means it's no longer available to Copilot for context. I'm going to come to chat. We just got our new command, and I'm going to say, add a service to this project for handling tasks. So it does have the context of my file names in my solution. It can see what else is there, so that's going to guide it. Let's see how it helps me add this to my project. And in this case, I'm asking it to suggest an entire file for me. And there are things in Copilot today which can actually generate an entire workspace. That's kind of at the bleeding edge of where Copilot is, but I'd say that's maybe not ready for prime time, but creating whole files like this, it can do. And we can see here that it has suggested for me a task service with a reasonable layout, a create, a find all, a find one. The problem is this looks nothing like my to-do service, right? This is kind of just all out on an island. So I could take this, but it would mean me going back and doing a lot of work to make it conform to my other file. So let's open our to-do service first. Now we have this open in our editor. And let's ask it the same question. Add a service to this project for handling tasks. So now it's suggesting to me something that looks a lot more like my existing project. You can see that we now are using Cosmos DB as our backing container over here on the right. And we have get tasks, which is like get to-dos, add task, which is like add to-do. In previous attempts at this, it has even emulated my terrible coding convention of the every other character is uppercased. Here it's saying, you know what, that's dumb. I'm going to give you a better way to do it. But you can see right by having the file open, I get a much more contextually accurate suggestion. So if I wanted to put this in my project, I would just come up here, click these three buttons, insert to a new file. It already suggested a file name for me, task.service, task.service.ts. And now we have some red squigglies. We could use Copilot to explain the red squigglies to us, and we could work through this and take it to completion. But you can see here, again, how context matters. Having the right file open at the right time informs Copilot and gives me a much more correct answer for my project and my coding standards. How about this mess? How do I improve this? I talked about the refactoring capabilities of Copilot. I'm going to come in here and clean up this code base. I don't know the regex to go fix this, but I don't have to. I can just come select this code here, go to my inline chat and say, make the function names camel case. And so just by using a plain English statement here, a statement that doesn't require any complex regex or understanding what I want to do, you can see it's giving me a diff view here, which is getting rid of all of the terribleness that I add in my file, and I can accept that and move on. The other thing I've not shown you, but is also here, is I could discard this. I could say, you know what, I'm not comfortable committing what you've suggested to my code, but I can discard it to a clipboard or discard it to a new file. So maybe I say, I like your idea, but I don't want it to directly edit my file. I just want to take it to the clipboard, maybe work with it some more, and then I'll bring it back in when I'm ready. So you do have these other options in the discard menu if you don't want to directly accept a suggestion in your project. So I'll click accept, and there we go. Our project is improved, our task is added, and we can move forward in our code base. Make sense? Last demo here, and then we'll get to our kind of our wrap-up. And for the last demo, I'm going to jump over to Visual Studio 2022. Now, everything we've done so far in Copilot in Visual Studio Code, you can do in Visual Studio. We have our chat, GitHub chat on the side here. We have GitHub Copilot chat sidebar, which you can interact with. We have our inline chat, which if you right-click, you can see Ask Copilot, and the keyboard shortcut here is Alt/. To get the inline chat just like we've had before. So all of that's here. So we're not going to repeat that because that's just the same thing in a different context. What I am going to do is I'm going to run this simple console app so you can see that all this app is doing is animating a string of characters across the screen. I want to break this app. I want this app to crash so that we can use another capability of Copilot in Visual Studio, which is helping us understand exceptions in the debugging process. So how do I break this application? Well, I can ask Copilot to do that for me. So I can come in here, and I can use my inline chat, so Alt/, add code that will cause this application to crash with a Stack Overflow error, because of course it should be a Stack Overflow error. So let's see what Copilot suggests to us to crash this application. It says I should call a recursive method that calls itself, and that will crash my app. That seems like a pretty good way to crash my app. So I'm going to go ahead and accept that. Let's run this, and let's see if Copilot did what we asked it to do. So my application runs. Yep, Stack Overflow error. We have crashed our application. Thank you, Copilot. But for our use today, we care about this. Inside of VS, and let me collapse these things a bit so we can see, we have our unhandled error exception. And how many times have we hit these errors and we're like, what does that mean? I don't know where to start with this error. Well, now directly inside of Visual Studio, when we have Copilot, we have this Ask Copilot option here. So we can ask Copilot to explain this current exception to us. And it's telling us, hey, you got a Stack Overflow error. And hey, dummy, it's caused by this recursive method. And you can probably fix it if you get rid of that or cause an escape condition for your recursive method. So it's directing me right to the solution and helping me understand the error. So within Visual Studio, you now have the ability to use Copilot to understand your exceptions, to understand your CPU analysis as you're debugging, all kinds of additional integrations to help you make your experience as a developer more productive. And that's what we've talked about all morning today. You can use it to write code and so much more in VS and VS Code. Cool? Good? All right, we got 2 minutes to drive this all the way to the finish line, so let's make sure we recap so you remember something from this morning. Tip recap, single, specific, short. That's probably tip number 1. As you're working with Copilot, make sure that you're using those prompts, you're using those comments to guide it in the direction that you want. Copilot loves patterns. We saw how well it does at helping us understand things like regex. It also works great for cron job syntax. Things that computers can read well that we can't. GitHub Copilot's great at understanding, creating, and explaining that to us, the meatbags. Trust but verify. We did that this morning. Take the code from GitHub Copilot, but you're the pilot. Understand if it's right or wrong and guide it back on track when it's off. Context is critical. We talked a lot about how context influences these completions. You saw some of that in action. And iterate, iterate, iterate. Don't take the first thing it gives you. Coming soon, there'll be more things GitHub Copilot can do for you. For instance, GitHub Copilot for pull requests can help you accelerate the process of doing quality pull requests. And there's more coming, so if you want to see what's coming up next, head out to github.com/features/preview. You can see some of the new capabilities coming soon for Copilot. Sign up for wait lists. A great way to see what's just around the corner for these tools. And I'll have a URL here at the end for you. If you want to see more of the tips like we were talking about today in action, the VS Code YouTube channel, youtube.com/code, is full of YouTube shorts, because I don't know how you all sat here for an hour, but these things are only 60 seconds, and that's about my attention span. So if you want to just get that 60-second hit of what we talked about, this is the place to go. You can find a lot more Copilot and VS Code help there. It's for individuals in business. We won't talk about this. Just know you can start it for yourself. But if you're a dev manager or you want to get this for your dev team, there are versions of this for business that give you even more control over how your team uses it. Lastly, Copilot Adventures is something new that we're working on within my team to try to give you a fun way to step away from the code you write every day and try to write code you've never written before using Copilot. So we've got some adventures, some puzzles to solve, and the goal is to use Copilot to help you solve that puzzle quickly. So if you want to give this a try, it's very new. Head over to akams/Copilot Adventures, and there's beginner, intermediate, and advanced puzzles there. I don't know that we have any prizes today other than just good job, but it's a fun way to go crack open some new problems and see how Copilot can be your assistant, and then bring that back to your main code base. Now, we all have seen the AI hype out there. We've all seen the fear, uncertainty, and doubt that things like GitHub Copilot, they're going to take our jobs as developers. But that's not the case. And I love this tweet because just being able to write code is not the job. You all are the pilots. You all are the experts, and this is a tool. And understanding how our tools work allow us to make them part of our process, allow us to understand their limits, and ultimately just be more effective, happier programmers as we create our applications. Thank you all very much for an hour and 1 minute of your time. Have a great DevReach. Thank you.